بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فسلام الله عليكم. We covered in the previous dars, we took a look at the fada'il and the mustahabbat of salah and the sunan, which including some very interesting debates and discussions on things like folding the arms or letting them hang, sadal or qabd, the Maliki transmissions, who's spoken about them, what texts have chosen to omit the discussion altogether. We kind of went through that thoroughly. So al-yawm we're going to take a look at makruhatus salah. We're going to begin with that. It's going to lead on to mufsidatus salah, those things. So beginning with those actions which are discouraged within salah, that a person shouldn't really be doing, but if they do them, it doesn't invalidate your salah. The next section is mufsidatus salah or mubtilatus salah, those things which will invalidate your salah if they occur. That will kind of then follow through with kitabul or salatul jum'ah or babu salatul jum'ah, the section on looking at the ahkam of jum'ah, what are the obligations, the conditions, what's special about jum'ah, what makes it different and stuff like that. So نبدأ بمكروهات الصلاة. تفضل أستاذنا.
ومكروهات الصلاة 20 أيضا: صلاة الرجل وهو يدافع الأخبثين البول والغائط والالتفات وتحدث النفس بأمور الدنيا وتشبيك الأصابع وفرقعتها والعبث بها أو بخاتمه أو لحيته أو بتسوية الحصى والإقعاء وهو جلوسه فيها على صدور قدميه في التشهد أو عند القيام من السجود، بل يعتمد على قدميه عند قيامه، والصفد وهو ضم القدمين في قيامه كالمكبل، والصفن وهو رفع إحداهما كما تفعل الدابة عند الوقوف، والصلب وهو وضع اليدين على الخاصرتين ويجافي بين العضدين في حال القيام كصفة المصلوب، والاختصار وهو وضع اليد على الخاصرة في القيام أيضا، وأن يصلي الرجل وهو متلثم أو كافت شعره أو ثوبه لأجل الصلاة، أو حامل في ثوبه أو كمه خبزا أو في فمه أو غيره ما يشغله عن صلاته، أو يصلي وهو غضبان أو جائع أو بحضرته طعام، أو يكون ضيق الخف مما يشغله عن فهم صلاته، أو يصلي بطريق من يمر بين يديه، أو يقتل برغوثا أو قملة فيها، أو يدعو في ركوعه أو قبل القراءة في قيامها، أو يقرأ في ركوعه أو سجوده أو تشهده، أو يجهر بالتشهد، أو يرفع رأسه أو يخفضه في ركوعه، أو يرفع بصره إلى السماء فيها، أو يسجد على البسط والتنافس والجلوس وشبهها مما لا تنبته الأرض ومما هو سرف أو فيه رفاهية.
Shukran. Alright, the makruhat of salah. 20 things. Once again, the Qadi Iyad, with a rounded figure so people can remember it with some ease. 20 different aspects of salah which should be avoided. That salatul rajuli wa huwa yudafi'ul akhbathain, or as the hadith says, wa yudafi'ul akhbathan. Now, that is a person who is kind of desperate to go to the toilet, but they're still clinging on because they don't want to repeat their wudu. So they're kind of like thinking, let's just quickly get the salah out the way. And I'm just saying that's how it generally happens, but the point being that if a person is in salah in such a situation where he is kind of distracted heavily, it is better for them to just leave their salah, relieve themselves, and then repeat the salah with tranquility, because khushu' is necessary within salah. Right. Wal iltifat, looking around. Now looking around doesn't actually, or moving around, this could be movement as well. It doesn't necessarily break the salah, it depends, it's contextual. So it depends on the context. If a person moves or just looks around, it would depend. Obviously, if they started moving a lot in a way that if somebody was to look at them, they would think this person is no longer in salah, that would invalidate the salah. But just general movement wouldn't. Okay, but it's makruh if it's unnecessary. Going over worldly matters is makruh. So if a person begins, it's almost at times, it may be almost inevitable or inescapable that a person will be distracted in salah. That's just human nature. But to kind of, it mentions what the hadduthun nafs, that you are kind of engaging and entertaining non-salah matters within salah. So you're going over, is makruh, it's reprehensible, it's something that shouldn't really be done, but it doesn't, however, invalidate the salah. وَتَشْبِيكُ الْعَصَابِعِ وَفَرْقَعَتُهَا. This, the crossing of the fingers, or kind of like doing that with your hands where the fingers kind of go into each other, is considered makruh. And there are certain ahadith which prohibited it at a time, to the extent that some ulama considered it haram just generally. To that extent, I'm just saying. Although other ulama thought that that doesn't really make sense. I mean, something like this, why would it just be haram? And then they've also found a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, to demonstrate examples, did that. So in an example with in a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ speaks about iman being snatched from a person's heart, if you like, when they do certain things. So the hadith that is used as an example, the Prophet ﷺ kind of like, he joins his fingers and then he kind of snatches them away and says that this is how the iman is kind of torn out. The reason being that you have to understand the community coming together, identity. This was the what we would call the formative stage, really, for the Medinan type of first Muslim civilization that was on earth. Identity and small things sometimes could play a key role. Worship was something that would become symbolic for the whole Muslim civilization. At that point, it was in its very early stages, resembling the Christians in acts of worship. And the Christians often would kind of pray with their fingers kind of crossed like that. That was, in this day and age, may not seem so much of a big deal, because now we have a whole identity. We have, like, Islam is very set in its way. People know what is Islamic. They know what Muslims are known for. At that time, in early days, having any type of overlap at times could be dangerous. So this is why it had a different ruling. And hence you see that when, for example, when salah was kind of ordained and the mas'ala of adhan came about, and the Prophet ﷺ asked people, what should we do? And they said, you know, we should. And and you're all aware of the kind of story, but the thing is, some of the suggestions that were made is that maybe we should use bells to call people. And that was actually some of the Sahaba put that forward and they were considering it, but it was obviously its strong resemblance to the Christians, which was unacceptable at that time. So, right, okay, moving on. Farqa'atuha, as to just kind of like crackling your knuckles and stuff like that, that's obviously makruh, because it's just seen as you're not paying attention in your salah. Abath biha, just mucking about. It mentions mucking about with things like it mentions your rings, jewelry, stuff like this. Your beard, it mentions the person just kind of going on constantly just mucking about, as in going over his beard and stuff like that. That would all be considered makruh. People would often pray in the courtyard or in open spaces where there would be things like pebbles and all this kind of around as well on the floor, and people would pray on just the earth naturally. So if a person starts mucking about with the pebbles and doing things like that, and that he does mention that with taswiyatul hasa, like maybe you're just kind of just sitting there, you're just playing about with the pebbles. It could be that you're in Salatul Jama'ah behind the Imam, that's why this would all be makruh. Then,
why did they say taswiyah?
Taswiyah.
That means kind of straightening out, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, he has said use that word, hasn't he? He said what taswiyatil hasa. The thing generally is that, you see, people at times would start kind of, in my understanding, if you have ever prayed rough like people, one of the things obviously where they have to move them for sujood and stuff like this, but you might be in between kind of just getting a bit carried away as well.
So like they're on the floor.
Because they would be on the floor, they would just be natural. It would be a natural setting and you'd just be standing there praying or sitting. And you might like start getting carried away and moving these hasa and stuff like that, which is discouraged. Then he mentions والإقعاء وهو جلوس في على صدور قدمي في التشهد. Now إقعاء is a position, is a seated position, which there is a certain difference about, a difference of opinion about what it actually refers to, because there's a hadith kind of, if you like, condemning it or saying that don't sit like this. Some have interpreted this to be as what seems to be apparent here in his first statement, that جلوسه في على صدور قدميه في التشهد, that a person just sits on the top of his feet, as in like whilst he's in tashahhud, so they would kind of be like just like that. That's one way of looking at iq'a. That, although to be fair, probably a lot of people do that. The other way that some people had seen is actually like this, kind of where a person's sitting with both feet up like that. And some people had translated or iq'a as that. Some had gone to the extent that it was like this, kind of like you had your feet almost like straight and you're sitting like that. Generally, I mean, this is makruh, to be not sitting in the correct type of manner, but it doesn't invalidate your salah. Generally, taking the understanding that he first said, a lot of people do that really. They sit on the, because they struggle sometimes. If they're struggling, that's not a problem. I mean, it's not, this is more about where people are just doing things just like in a way they just can't be bothered to do it properly or something like that. It's more, their intention does play a big role as well. Now he's going to go through a lot of different positions within salah that are makruh. And he mentions, he mentions one called safad. And he says, وَهُوَ ضَمُّ الْقَدَمَيْنِ فِي قِيَامِكَ الْمُكَبَّلِ. That's like standing up in a way where both your feet are absolutely next to each other, joined. Like, because that, it would just be awkward. Okay. هذا لكليهما. That's for both men and women. It's not about, you see, the Maliki madhab is one which does not prescribe things like how to stand, like the way the other madhabs, especially the Hanafi, etc., do. So they will say have this much space and do this and do that. The Maliki madhab would usually just say just stand naturally. Just stand however you would assume it to be natural. But although it does say for women, like Ibn Abi Zayd transmits and other people, that women should generally in ruku and in sujood kind of be a bit more withdrawn, just what's more astar, what's more covering. But in terms of the standing, in terms of like the positioning in general, the salah is the same. It's not essentially different. Where there are some changes, it's just for safeguarding. It's not for things like saying that the salah is essentially different. Now, this would, because that would, if a person just stood like with their both feet right together like that would, then it, apart from it just being weird and looking weird, it's also, chances are that, if there's a few of them and they're standing like that in Jama'ah, you push one and then you just have like a row of, like a domino effect. Right, so now he moves on to soften. Now this is, he says, وَهُوَ رَفْعَ إِحْدَاهُمَا كَمَا تَفْعَلُ الدَّابَ عِنْدَ الْوُقُوفِ. If a person was to kind of, in salah, start lifting one of his legs or doing something like this is makruh. Like, let's just say if they pick up one foot and start like kind of, I don't know, like almost like standing on the tip of it, or just doing this type of stuff, just generally is seen as abath. It's seen as just like mucking about, and hence makruh. Right, and then salab, وهو وضع اليدين على الخاصرتين. Now, this is, he mentions that to kind of almost be, I know it sounds weird, but to kind of be crucified in a way, but it doesn't mean like the crucifixion, the way we understand it generally in a cross. Because a lot of the times historically, I'm not sure how But there is some discussion. Generally, when they would say that such and such was crucified, a lot of the times it wasn't actually like that, like the way people understand today Jesus to be like on the cross in that way. Although that may have been on a cross or whatever, that the discussion on that is different. But generally, when they would kind of stick people up, it would kind of be a bit. They would kind of just be like this. They'd be kind of stuck up. So it kind of like wrap their arms and. Their arms would be tied as well, and they would just be tied across the chest and across the legs and onto like a tree or onto something. They'd be kind of strung up like that. It wouldn't normally be like this, like the cross formation. But he's mentioning doing something like that. So if a person was in salah kind of doing that, it's kind of like just posing away, that would be clearly makruh. He then mentions wal-ikhtisar. Okay, and that's a similar one, except it's more, you're not kind of like, you haven't got your arms up, but you've got them on your hips. Standing up like that, ikhtisar, this would be makruh. I'll tell you what is interesting here. What is interesting? What do you think?
The position of the hands.
Exactly, but why? Exactly. You see, the question would be, that why would you kind of do that anyway? I mean, why would your hands be there? Because if your arms are folded, I mean, that's kind of ruled out of the question. I mean, your chances of doing something like that don't even come into the equation. So what suits that better, or what seems to make sense there, is that your arms were already at the sides. And therefore you've kind of maybe just taken them up, or you've just put them onto your hips, or it does seem to kind of more gel, if you like, with that position of standing as opposed to with your arms folded. Although it's not enough, I can see Doc just giving me this look like, what the... well, I think so, because if you're standing like this and all of a sudden you're like this, it would be a bit weird.
Look, you know that position, the other one, where you're
okay.
on tiptoes. Why would you be in that position?
Tiptoes are quite easy.
No, but look, that's quite simple. Like it does say 1 foot. So if a person's kind of going like this in their salah and doing stuff like that.
You sit on your feet.
The one at Iq'ah.
Because people might be sitting a long time and start moving around it.
No, which one? The one with both feet up?
Well, we don't know.
No, but a lot of people, I've actually seen a lot of people sit like this in salah, like that. I've seen a lot that can't actually kind of sit down like that. I've seen a lot of people, they come out of sujood and they just stay like that. And I've seen a lot like this as well. And
why would someone have their legs crossed? Yeah, because you can have your legs crossed, right?
But he's not mentioned that.
No, but we're just talking about...
Unless Qadi Iyad privately kind of messaged you.
I think he will mention that. So you can sit with your... You know how in the Risala they talked about you can have your legs crossed.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? You wouldn't. So basically, they're just saying, someone who argues, could just argue that, look, if you've got your arms crossed, and then for whatever reason, let's say you're tired or you want to stretch out or something, you shouldn't put your hands on your hips and do that. Oh, come on, but any advocate of qabd would say that as evidence for something.
No, it's not as evidence. It's what you call... I mean, it's... No, it's interesting. It's not. It's like isharat, isn't it? It's not.
How you'd explain why your hands are there anyway? You're saying basically because you're tired, so you might just put them there.
Whatever the reason might be.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing is that, you know, the mas'ala, just to clarify, I mean, don't want to digress too much, but the mas'ala of crossing your legs, that is a legitimate mas'ala. It's not like where something's gone wrong. That is, they say that if a person had to sit down and pray for whatever reason, like for example some injury or something, how should they sit? And the Malikiyah had primarily chosen that you cross your legs, whereas the Hanafi had said that no, you should sit throughout in as though it's a tashahhud position. So that wasn't something gone wrong. That was actually, they were advising on how to sit. They were saying that, you know, yajlis mutarabbi'an, that you sit like with your legs crossed like that. That's the Maliki understanding. Although, to be fair, nobody, I don't know if people would really be aware of that. If you sat in a masjid just doing your, like, I think it probably caused more problems. Yeah, that is exactly what I'm just saying. That's what the Maliki. So that's not a good example to. That's not where something's gone wrong. That's actually where you are advised to kind of pray in that way. Naam. So Right, ikhtisar. I was just saying it's interesting, that's all. I wasn't saying it's a clear dalil.
What's the difference between ikhtisar and salah? Because they're both.
Yeah, they're similar. He mentions they're similar. One would be kind of like I said, kind of doing something like that, and one would be just placing your hands on your hips. Similar type. Basically, it's just mucking about with your hand, not keeping them as they should be. And this is an interesting one. He says, he mentions that if a person should pray, وَهُوَ مُتَلَثِّمْ or مُلَثَّمْ, that a person should pray with his face covered, okay, is considered makruh. Now, that is actually for men and women in general. It's not just for like men. That refers to generally both. A lot of the ulama have written that that's because لأنه من الغلو في الدين. A lot of them, like you'll see in the Hashi of the Suqi and some of the other Mashayikh, Al-Adawi and others, they have said that is from, they've actually said it, that that's from like extremism in the deen. Now,
is that just in the prayer that they're saying?
now what's interesting is the Suqi actually says fi salah wa fi ghayriha or fi ghayriha. He actually says whether it's in salah or outside of salah. But although a lot of them just stuck to saying within the salah, like Ahmad Dardir and others, so they will just say that, oh, within the salah. Most ulama have said within the salah for a woman to cover her face is considered like an extremist practice, because it's like, what's she doing?
Did you say, so look, where's he from?
Who? The Suqi, Egyptian, I believe.
Yeah.
And so but the thing is that generally the question being that why, and the answer is that because they saw this as a form of like you're kind of excessively trying to do something which isn't actually required. So they saw it as ghulu fi din. What is interesting though at this stage is that those of you that have heard of the Murabitin, right? Have you heard of that? Right.
The original.
The original, yeah. Yeah.
Fake ones.
Right. Right, this is being recorded.
Oh, yeah,
So the thing is that the Murabitin, obviously a dynasty that rose and really rose, a legendary dynasty, I should say, with the true leader being Yusuf ibn Tashfin. But they came from the sub-Saharan desert. That was the point of origin, if you like, where they emerged from. And they did really revolutionize especially parts of northwest Africa. Obviously, one of the things they did was built their capital, Marrakesh. Marrakesh was built by them. They also managed to conquer or salvage the situation of Al-Andalus. Muslim Andalus had become so bad and crippled that it was 22 or 23 different little states that they were in a really in dire circumstances, in which Muslims said that, and historians said, give it a few more decades and they may have been wiped out, because they were that weak and that they used to pay heavy taxes to the Christian kings at the time and so on. And it was really, the situation was so bad that the Muslims would often kind of pair up against each other with the Christians, and they would kind of attack. And this amazing type of incidents which took place. But anyway, what's interesting is that Yusuf ibn Tashfin brings his army along, and they manage to save the situation of Al-Andalus from becoming absolutely destructive. And they restore this legacy to Al-Andalus, which lasts for almost another century of glory after that. The thing is, they had a trend. You see, they were sub-Saharan people, and they always kept their type of the way of saying is maybe like their sub-Saharan roots or practices were very evident. So, for example, one of the things, they were a warrior people, like where they emerged from, the type of whole, they were Berber in essence, and the whole type of origin of their clan, the Masmudi and the Lamtuni and this whole, they were like a very fighting clan and so on. And they always kept this, even as their dynasties. One of the things they did is that wherever they went, they set up these barracks known as Ribat. And this was where they had their name, the Murabitin, the people who set up these military barracks wherever they go. And they became extremely popular, these Ribat did. But they also kept their type of style of dress. They had a particular way of being, and like the way they would wear their turbans and the way they would do things. They kept that, even though they became the ruling class, but they kept their type of attire. And one of the things they would do is they thought as a style would cover their face. It was known about the Murabitin that they were actually referred to as the Mulathimun or the Mulathamun, that they were like, they obviously because of that desert background and obviously riding in the desert and so on, the men would obviously wear this type of, like obviously the turban, they would bring it around and cover their face with it. Now they, even in the cities, like when they would come, they would stay like that at times. But even when they went to Al-Andalus, Spain, now in Spain obviously you had a whole mixture, remember, I mean those of you want more details, inshallah, listen to my course Al-Andalus from Rise to Fall. So, and also join me on my tour next year which is in the footsteps of legends. So, but anyway right, but anyway, coming back to this, the point was that there was a huge mixture of people in Al-Andalus by that time. I mean, from the rule of Bani Umayyah, there were obviously the original Arabs that had gone there, the converts, those of mixed origin, the known as the Muwalladun. There were also a huge group of people known as the Saqaliba, who were Slavic in origin. So you see, because the Europeans that were in Spain were of a Mediterranean type of look, generally. I mean, they were like either French, that type of look, or coming out. They weren't like the blonde-haired, blue-eyed type of person in general. That wasn't the type of look of the people living in that part of the world. Now, the Slavs, these people that they call the Saqlabis, that were brought over originally as slaves and so on, they were purchased by the Umayyad type of kings. And a lot of them trained them really well and treated them very well. And they found these people to be extremely loyal, they say. They found these Saqlabis to be like very loyal to the Khulafa. So what happened in return, the Khulafa of the time would really kind of like spend a lot of money on them and take care of them, take good care of them. This then also created a reputation that the Saqaliba are well looked after, which then contributed to a major influx of the Saqaliba coming to Al-Andalus. They came and had several jobs, and a lot of them, they say that they had like strong postures and stuff. And when I was checking up historically, they say perhaps part of what would be modern day, maybe Poland or East Russia and places like this was what the Slav or the Saqaliba were originally from. So maybe like that. I think it was perhaps, I don't know whether it was west or east, but it was perhaps, it said that part of the world. So maybe that type of Ivan Drago type of look, right, they had in Rocky IV. So these people that were described as like really big and so on, and they came and they took up a lot of these royal guard positions. So, and then a lot of them converted to Islam. And a lot of them also were kind of, at that time, slavery obviously was high, was kind of bought as very young children, because you had like, especially in France, they would sell loads of these children. A lot of them were bought and then raised as Muslims and raised as these royal guards. So this also, and then these people mixed as well with the other, the mixed race from the Berber, the Arabs, and all of that put together produced what became known as almost the Andalusi people. So they were a real of mixed heritage, but they kind of produced this type of almost race, if you like. It wasn't homogeneous amongst everybody, it was heavily, these were the roots that they came from. Now, the Murabitun, even when they were ruling, so they've moved over into Al-Andalus, and they were now the ruling class, and obviously with them they brought several people in the armies and so on, and they all kept that tradition of covering their face, usually wherever they would go. And one of the things they would do is they would pray like that as well. So Ibn Rushd was the supreme judge at the time, and he was asked that, what is the ruling of these Murabitin praying with their face covered? So he had said that because it's of their dress code, and it's also not just their dress code, it's become symbolic of the Murabitin themselves, that they were known as those people who covered their face. Therefore, it's permissible for them to pray in that way. But it's interesting kind of reading up the dynamics and how it impacts sometimes fiqh. Right, so also he mentions kafitun sha'rahu wa thawbah li ajli salah. If a person just tied up his hair for salah only, or just held back his clothes or something specifically for salah, that would be discouraged. There were obviously historically a lot of the men did have long hair. They would do things like have ponytails, or they would kind of plait their hair and stuff like this. To just do that for salah would be discouraged. But if a person was doing that anyway, it's not a problem to pray like that.
Mufti, did they rely on some kind of narration for that?
Yeah, because there's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ said that one of you should not stop or prevent his hair from doing sujood when he goes into sujood. Like he shouldn't kind of like, and so based on that narration, there are some other narrations with some of the, I believe the tabi'een or the sahaba were praying, and one of them had like a ponytail, and the other person came and opened it whilst he was in salah, and he says to him that I heard that the Prophet ﷺ said you shouldn't, stop, prevent your hair from doing sujood and so on. So this mas'ala does have its roots.
Yeah, but did he tie up his hair then go into prayer, or did he just have it like that?
No, but this is where the fuqaha say, obviously, that's the fiqh ruling, that if you're doing it just for salah, then it's discouraged. But if you naturally have your hair like that generally, then it's not a problem. Just as other things, like people will say, like praying in a t-shirt, for example, or praying, or like traditionally people folding up their arms, it would mention. Now, if you did it just for salah, they will say, oh, this is makruh, like you're supposed to, why are you kind of getting all scruffy just for salah, almost. But if that's how you were, then it's not a problem.
It says here in the translation here, to tuck up like his clothes as well.
Yeah.
So what would that refer to? Like,
I mean, that would also in a similar way refer to like if you now, I mean, a good example is like what I said for us today is like folding your sleeves, like kind of folding them back as a t-shirt.
okay,
But
yeah, but what
in
about
thi-
like, let's say like the trousers? Like a lot of people like fold up their trousers and stuff like that. Would it apply to that?
Okay, they weren't talking about that when he said it, just to be clear.
Yeah, okay.
But okay, can it include something like that? It may, or it would depend on your intention. You see, it doesn't really make sense. What people seem to understand is that they feel that this is called isbal, where you lower the garment below the ankle. Now, is isbal like reprehensible or forbidden? There is a debate. Many scholars have said no, it's only at that time it was done out of arrogance, and it was a sense of, and because of that it was forbidden. If that the illah has gone, if the cause for it has disappeared, so has its ruling. The thing would be, as today I would probably say, is the trend of people dropping their trousers from the waist until it's kind of uncovered. That's become more of a trend today. So it isn't really, and definitely isn't about dragging your trousers. But because many people, like the Hanafi madhab, generally say, oh no, isbal, the ruling stays, regardless of time or whatever. So now, according to them, that having your trousers below your ankles is either haram or close to haram. Now, so for some reason, people then associate that with salah. So what people will do is, before they go into salah, they will kind of raise it. And then after salah, they'll drop it.
Exactly. So what would the
It doesn't really make any sense. I would probably assume that it may come into this as makruh. But if they were doing it based on their understanding of the hadith somehow, then, I mean, obviously it's better to leave things natural the way you are. So if somebody was there and you were to tell them, I mean, it doesn't really make sense. Why are you folding that up for salah? Unless they had a belief that, look, I believe this is wrong, so I just don't want to be doing the wrong thing in salah. So fair enough, in that case, they've got an understanding behind it. Otherwise, generally, they shouldn't be doing it.
Can you pray in a vest?
Can you pray in a vest?
Vest on.
Yeah, you can pray in a vest. But if you just, what the point is, you shouldn't just kind of dress down to a vest just for salah.
Now, because I've been playing football in the park before, I had a vest on.
Okay.
And the brother said to me, oh, you can't put a t-shirt on to pray.
Okay, very particular t-shirt was it?
Video crew ne?
Right, but no, you can pray in a vest. It's not. I mean, a lot of the, you see, you got to remember something. A lot of the Salaf at the time, or especially the Sahaba in their day and age, a lot of them sometimes didn't even have full covering. Like a lot of them would pray without a shirt on. That's just because of the time and the situation they were in. So it's not. I mean, that's not a problem. But a person that ruling of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Ya bani Adam, khudhu zinatakum inda kulli masjid. Now, you should take, like, Allah is encouraging us to kind of be adorned for the salah. So a person shouldn't dress down, but unless he was in that state already. We shouldn't kind of say, I know now it's salah, let me take off my coat, take off my shirt, just go down to a vest and then pray my salah. Like that. Like, why would you be doing something like that? That's dressing down for salah. That's wrong. But if you're already in that situation, then it's not a problem.
You know, people, they roll the trousers up and they say it's sunnah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I was saying was isbal, what we call isbal. And really, we don't, I mean, the general understanding is that the Malikiya and the Shafi'iyya and other people didn't consider that to be like forbidden, like to have your trousers below your ankles and stuff like this. They saw that as the hadith mentions with arrogance. It was a thing at the time where people did do that with arrogance. But in this day and age, or even centuries after, that trend had well died out. It wasn't a thing of arrogance anymore. So it didn't really make sense to go on about. And obviously the strongest dalil is that Abu Bakr radiallahu anh is somebody that would constantly, his izar would kind of hang below, and the Prophet ﷺ said to him, Lasta minhum, you know, like he went to complain to the Prophet ﷺ that I do try and keep it above, but it kind of drops down. The Prophet ﷺ said to him, oh, don't worry about it, like you're Lasta minhum, you're not from those people. So, na'am. Right, or it mentions, oh, hamilun fi thawbiya kammi khubzan or fi famihi or ghayri ma yashghalu an salah. Carrying anything in either your pockets or at that time in their sleeves, people used to carry things, or if somebody had something in their mouth in a way that would distract them from salah. If a person decided to put a cigarette in his mouth and pray salah, that wouldn't be on. Right, so, but likewise, if a person had chewing gum in his mouth, but then just kind of stuck it to a side and carried on praying, that wouldn't invalidate the salah, but it would be makruh in that sense. Okay.
Why would it be makruh? You don't chew on it.
Yeah, because obviously you've got.
It's not putting you off though, is it? And you don't want to waste it.
I think the salah is a bit more important than that. than your chewing gum. Just have a good chew on it first and then start. We wouldn't want you to miss out. Take a whole hour. Don't worry about sunrise. Right, so, right. Oh, yusalli wa huwa, or praying in a wrong state of mind. If a person was all vexed up and angry, and it mentions, or extremely hungry and starving, and then praying like thinking, God damn, I can't wait to, okay, I just want this thing over and done with, quickly eat my food. That obviously is makruh. أو بحضرة طعام. If food comes to you, it's better to eat. But then, you see, there is a discussion on this. I know the majority of the ulama say that if food came to you, and even if you're kind of hungry, but you decide to pray, your salah is still valid. Except the Zahiriyah who say your salah is now invalid. That because the hadith mentions that إذا حضر العشاء فلا صلاة فابدعوا بالعشاء, that if the food arrives, then begin with the food. So the Zahiriyya, the literalist, said that anything else would render your salah invalid. But that's not the position of the majority of the Muslims, really, that you can pray. It will be discouraged. But sometimes it's, you see, the thing will be that it's like what one of our teachers said, you see, he said the thing is that people in the past, they probably thought, look, let's quickly eat so we can just relax and pray salah. But people nowadays, like, I tell you, let's quickly pray so we can just relax and eat food and chill out. So this is the thing, you see. So the situations have obviously changed. So it's not the same, really. Now, a person, like I said, it's makruh. You should, if you're starving, then maybe at least have something to kind of, and then you can get back to it if you want afterwards. Or just eat. If you've got time, then eat properly. Right. Anything else? It mentions that he mentions about like shoes or anything that, like things which would just distract you from your salah, really. And that's a bit, I mean, it is common sense. Anything which is distracting. Or if a person was to pray in a road where people were passing by, that would be distracting as well. Or if you start killing, I don't know, like mosquitoes in between, or you're killing some, I don't know, bugs or things like this, that would be considered makruh.
But you know this thing in this line, أن يكون ضيق الكف.
Yeah, I mean,
What does that mean literally? ضيق الكف.
you see, now literally he's talking about like if your shoes were kind of like so tight and it was kind of bothering you from salah. It doesn't have to be just about that. It could be about anything, because the point is, he says that ما يشغله عن فهم صلاته, that anything that it will be bothering you, that you know you can't even fully think about what you're saying. You just, okay, you might be saying it out of routine. So I'm just saying, you know, like at-tahiyat and I'm doing this, but I'm really so bothered about this thing, it's hurting me, or it could be, I don't know, somebody's, like he's mentioned shoes as an example, but it could be like you're praying in some other garment which is really restricting, or it's hurting you, or it's doing something in a way that you, I know sometimes some people pray in some jeans, and I've heard them say stuff like I can't sit in tashahhud with it properly and stuff like this, and sometimes,
Skinny jeans.
Yeah.
I mean, they,
I don't
presumably, I don't think
By the sounds of it.
right. No, what gave you that impression? So the thing is, it would,
The shorts.
if it was, whatever it is that distracts a person from understanding his salah would be considered makruh. Now you shouldn't be also making dua in ruku' or before the surah or the recitation while standing. And you shouldn't be reciting in your ruku' or sujood or tashahhud in generally. Those are not places for recitation. Like everything has its place. لِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَالٍ. That, you shouldn't kind of have your head raised, looking about, wandering about, or kind of like moving it around in ruku', or basically not carrying out the actions correctly and completely. You shouldn't be looking around as well, moving your eyes maybe to the sky and so on and stuff like this. And he mentioned it's makruh to do sujood on things like certain carpets or certain things which have been laid out, or he mentions leather, or things which are kind of almost luxurious, or kind of demonstrate luxury and so on. It's better not to be doing that. Today, to be fair, everybody prays usually indoors. It'll be some form of unnatural type of layout anyway, whether it will be the flooring, whether it will be the carpet, the rug, whatever. It doesn't make too much of a difference. It's just telling you a preferred traditional way, that's all. Now he moves on to mufsidatu salah and mentions 20 again, those things which will invalidate salah, and they're 20 as well. Now,
ومفسدات الصلاة 20 أيضا وهي ترك ركن من أركانها أو فريضة من فرائضها المذكورة كترك النية أو قطعها أو القراءة أو الركوع أو غير ذلك منها أو ما قدر عليه منها إن كان له عذر عن استيفائه عمدا ترك ذلك أو جهلا أو سهوا فهو مفسد لها إلا القبلة وإزالة النجاسة وستر العورة وتركها سهوا مخفف وتعاد الصلاة منه في الوقت وكذلك الجهل بالقبلة وكذلك إسقاط الجلسة الأولى من السنن أو ترك 3 تكبيرات أو سمع الله لمن حمده مثلها يفسد الصلاة إن فات جبرها بسجود سهو وكذلك الزيادة فيها عمدا أو كثير سهوا والردة والقهقهة كيف كانت والكلام لغير إصلاحها والأكل والشرب فيها والعمل الكثير من غير جنسها وغلبة الحقن أو القرقرة وشبهها وكذلك الهم حتى يشغله عنها ولا يفقه ما صلى والاتكاء حال قيامها على حائط أو عصا لغير عذر بما لو أزيل عنه مركزه لسقط وذكر صلاة فرض يجب ترتيبها عليه والصلاة في الكعبة أو على ظهرها وتذكر المتيمم الماء فيها واختلاف نية المأموم وإمامه يفسد صلاته وكذلك فساد صلاة إمامه بغير سهو الحدث أو النجس أو إقامة الإمام عليه صلاة أخرى وكذلك ترك سنة من سننها المؤكدة عمدا يفسدها عند بعضهم فتمت خصال الصلوات الخمس بهذا 100 خصلة.
Allahu Akbar. Shukran. Amazing. See, when he finishes it, he goes, فَتَمَّتْ خِصَالُ الصَّلَوَاتِ, that the characteristics of salah have come to an end as 100 characteristics. See, these, he has kind of styled it out a bit, I must say, a bit slick in his way of doing things. Right, okay, so mufsidatu salah, those things which invalidate salah are 20, and begins with leaving out a pillar of salah. A core aspect of salah will invalidate it. And he mentions, although he says, just so you know, he says ruknun min arkaniha or faridatun min fara'idiha. Don't get caught up in the wording, they are the same thing. I know Doc's already thinking of that question, that why is he mentioning these things? It's just, a rukn is a condition, a faridah is an obligation. In the Maliki madhab, generally these are the same type of things. So when we say something is a condition, it is an obligation of that thing. Although linguistically they may have different meanings slightly, but when we talk about actions, there's an overlap. Except generally in Hajj. The Maliki make a distinction in Hajj. They will say a faridah is an obligation which is reparable. Like even if you leave it out, you can repair it. Whereas a rukn is an irreparable type of obligation. So if you miss that, that's it, the whole Hajj is gone. That's as far as the Maliki are concerned. There is another little thing which maybe you might be able to add here, which I think really just my ijtihad, right? But it's that what he might be talking about is that there are some things they mention which are the absences of. And so he might say things like, for example, not talking in salah is an obligation. Whereas you wouldn't really be able to say that's a rukn, because it's an omission, it's a negative act, it's not a positive, it doesn't have any existence. So maybe those things you might be able to kind of bring out here. Do you understand? Otherwise, don't get caught up in the wording. I know some of you have asked already about this, but there isn't really a difference. The Hanafiya, by the way, do make a difference. They make a clear distinction between wajibat and fara'id. And I suppose their fara'id would be their arkan, and then they have wajibat. According to the majority of the scholars, a wajib is a necessary act, a fard is a necessary act, a lazim. These are just synonyms, according to the majority of the scholars. However, according to the Hanafiya, they made a technical distinction between wajib and fard. They said that a fard is that which has been established by clear, conclusive evidence, stemming really, and it must be clear in two ways. One, in it being established, i.e. it's from the Quran, so it's what they call, the Arabic word for it is qat'i, it's conclusive, the way the evidence has reached us. And two, they say that the evidence itself, so the wording, whatever, is very clear. So they would say that is qat'i, that is a fard. Then there's some things which might be clear, but they haven't come to us from the Quran, they've come from the Sunnah, or they've come from other things. So that they gave it this other term, wajib. So although they treat them both the same, they treat them both as obligatory, but they've made a technical distinction. They've also added that a person by denying a wajib remains a Muslim, but by denying a fard becomes a kafir. That was a Hanafi way of looking at things. But anyway.
The Hanabila distinguish between shart, fard and rukn.
Okay. I mean, I would understand that the Hanabila's understanding, the Hanbalis I didn't really quote for for reasons that they are a madhab, ain't they? No, I'm joking. Right. It's just that a lot of the Andalusi ulama, whenever they used to quote the different schools of thought, they never used to quote the Hanbalis. It's like they never, like Ibn Rushd never quotes them. It's like when Ibn Abdul Barr writes his book on the major imams, he calls it al-intiqa fi fada'il al-a'immat al-thalathah al-fuqaha, doesn't he? He says, he writes his book about the imams, the imams of fiqh, whatever, but only about the three, and he calls it the three fuqaha. He leaves that. But I mean, with all due respect to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, My understanding of the Hanbali school is, you're correct, that because they consider anything that has been established in a way like a hadith as an obligation as well. They do take that a bit of that literal approach sometimes. So to them, some things may be an obligation, but that doesn't impact upon the thing. I.e., that if you look at wudu, so the madhab of Imam Ahmad says to say Bismillah is an obligation in a way. But he doesn't say it invalidates the wudu or it's a rukn of the wudu. But he says it's from the fara'id of it. Even though he himself considered the hadith da'if, which is quite interesting. But anyway, anyway, I'll let the Hanabila explain the reasoning behind the fiqh. Let's get back to the mufsidat. So, doing something like abandoning the niyyah during the salah, thinking that, okay, I ain't praying anymore. That's it. If you think that, then your salah's over. Okay, so if a person abandons a major, like a condition or an obligation of salah, when says, I ain't going to pray Fatiha in this salah, I ain't going to do ruku', I ain't going to do sujood, the salah would become invalid. Right. If you leave any of those, even if it's out of ignorance, the salah would still be invalid. Okay, if you leave an obligation, even if it's forgetfulness, if a person forgot to do ruku', that would invalidate the salah unless he or she salvaged the situation. Ilgha. Right. Now, the only things that you do have some room for, some space, is he mentions the qibla. If you got the qibla wrong, but you did your best, that's okay. Removing impurities, if there were impurities on your clothes or so on, because I mentioned the Malikiya have already said that many of them did consider removal of impurities as only a sunnah and not an obligation. That was the riwayah of Ashhab, if you remember. Satrul awra, being covered properly, because many of the Malikiya did say that the covering of the awra, although it was an obligation, but it was not an obligation of salah. It was an independent obligation to salah. And therefore, even if a person had prayed their salah uncovered, it wouldn't really impact the salah. That's not the popular thought within the Maliki school. The popular thought is that it is an obligation to cover with capacity. Like, as long as you have the ability to cover and you remember to do so, you should be covered. If it forgetfully happened, it's not a problem. Or if you didn't have the capacity to cover at that time for whatever reason, then it's okay. But generally you should. But because the other opinion also exists in the school, it gives it a bit of scope. Okay? Now, so if a person forgetfully left out, like missed the qibla, or forgetfully didn't remove the impurities, or forgetfully wasn't covered properly, that salah would still be valid. Although it's better for them to repeat it, but it's not necessary. Right. And
you know what it says, sorry, you know what it says for tarkuha sahwa al-mukhaffaf?
Yeah.
What exactly does it mean?
He means like
if you leave it forgetfully.
Forgetfully, it's kind of, yeah, it's treated, it's what you call extenuating circumstances. So it's not made out so type of harsh. So it's not, and this tu'adu salah fil waqt, that the salah is repeated in the time, literally means that there's no obligation to repeat it once the time is gone. Meaning it's better to repeat it, but it's not necessary. Right. Also, he mentions, yeah. So, like, you see, when some of the scholars say this salah should be repeated in the time, what they mean by that is it's recommended to repeat it. It's not like you're not sinful if you didn't. So let's say a person in that case, like they've realized, let's just say, for example, you realized, oh my God, I had this on my clothes, I totally, forgot about it, and I prayed my salah. So now I should have changed my clothes. Now the person should repeat their salah, ideally, like it's recommended for them. But if they didn't, they're not actually sinful for it. Okay, because things like being covered and removing impurities are a condition, but only with remembrance and with the capacity to do something about it.
When you say it's capacity,
Like what I mean is, like, let's say if a person didn't have any clothes right now, or let's say they were, I don't know, like let's just say a person, it could be, I don't know, let's say you happen to be in a changing room, and or you happen to be somewhere where now your clothes are stuck or something and you can't get access to them, but the time for salah is going to disappear, so you've only got, let's say, something like 5 minutes left before salah time goes. Do you hang about and try and get that situation resolved and pray out of time, or should you just pray even though you're not covered properly?
so if say like, if you say like in an example of you have 5 minutes left and you just came out of the shower with a towel
Yeah,
wraps around you properly, then you can pray in a towel,
yeah,
and that's okay.
that's okay. I mean, if you, that's obviously given the circumstance, not that your clothes are right there and you're just like, no, why don't I just pray? Why don't I just pray with my towel? It's more like if there was something which now would make, like, you wouldn't be able to get your clothes right now for whatever reason.
There's no reason why you couldn't pray in town, is there?
The towel would actually, if it's covered well, it would cover it anyway. But that would be fine anyway. But I meant even if you had to pray in, let's just say, your trunks, or on its own, or you weren't, like, let's just say, that's why I gave the example of, like, the changing room example. Like, you've come out from swimming and you've thought, wait a minute, I don't know, all of a sudden you forget the code to your to your locker, and then you're like, well, and it just happens to have only 7 minutes left for Ghurub al-Shams, and you're like, I need to quickly do Asr. Should I just go in that room and just quickly pray like this, or should I wait, hang about? I mean, ideally you should just pray if you can. If you don't, I mean, fair enough. I mean, you've got that reason, but really you should just pray, and it's not an obligation at that stage. Cool. So, right, he mentions here leaving out the first sitting, or leaving 3 takbirat, or something like Sami Allahu liman hamida. He says here will invalidate the salah if you didn't do sujood al-sahw for it. What he's talking about now is if a person chose, if a person left out sujood al-sahw, which is the sajda to fix, where you miss out like sunnah things in salah. Now, if you forgot to do that sajda afterwards, but you remember now, like, and you're still there, if you choose not to do it, like if you think, oh, forget it, he's going with the opinion that it actually breaks the salah, like that salah would become invalid and you need to repeat it. That is a challenged opinion. The understanding is that can a salah become invalid by you having left out a sunnah? And really, what makes sense is that a sunnah should not break the salah, like if a person left a sunnah. That is in general also what most of the madhabs have said, including Imam Malik's madhab in one opinion, because all of them have generally said if a person forgot to do sujood al-sahw and then didn't do it, let's just say a person didn't do sujood al-sahw, the majority of the ulama have said his salah was fine. There has been a small exception, amongst them Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and amongst them Abu al-Hasan al-Qurhi from the Hanafiya, and there's been some Malikis who have said no, oh no, you have to repeat your salah again. But generally the thing should be, because look, what are you trying to fix? You're trying to fix a sunnah. So how can trying to fix a sunnah all of a sudden invalidate your salah? Do you see my point? The reasoning behind it. So I mean, that, although he's put that position here, I believe that's a bit of a harsher position, that is. Now he then mentions وَكَذَلِكَ زِيَادَةُ فِيهَا عَمْدًا. Increasing your salah intentionally will invalidate it. That makes sense. Like if a person says, I'm going to add an extra rak'ah, I'm going to add an extra ruku', that would just break his salah. أو كثيرا سهوا, or if he got carried away but just forgetfully added so much more to it, it would still invalidate it. The ulama say if you add almost 50% more to a salah forgetfully, it would break the salah. So let's say, for example, you complete that would mean you add a whole, what is it, 1 rak'ah to a 2 rak'ah. It would mean you add 2 more rak'ahs to a 4 rak'ah salah. Like forgetfully, it would break the salah.
What if it was just one?
If it's just 1, 2, if it's like, for example, like in a 4 rak'ah or 3 rak'ah salah, it wouldn't invalidate it if it's forgetful. Because the whole point is, what they're trying to discuss is when, at what point has this salah totally become something else now? And they've said that if something by 50% of it has changed, then we would say that is a new thing. It's no longer the same thing.
I thought it was like if it was 4 rak'ah, if you did more than 8, then it's gone.
No, if you do more than half of it,
So
they would
4
generally
rak'ah
say.
is more than
I mean, definitely, obviously, if you had 4 to 4, that would be 8 rak'ah you've prayed. But even if you pray 6 rak'at,
yeah.
that would kind of invalidate your, because like you've added half more to an actual.
But you wouldn't know, would you? Like, because you've forgotten.
I mean, true, but this is understanding that you now recognized. Because obviously, if you
in
talk,
that case, would you stop and then just do it again?
if you haven't completed it, then you just stop and just go straight to the last point and start finishing it and do sujood al-sahw. So like if you're on your, let's say you got up for your 5th rak'ah and you realize, oh wait a minute, this is my 5th rak'ah, you should just sit down and just carry on and do your sujood al-sahw. Even if you realize, wait a minute, I've just stood up, I think this is actually my 6th rak'ah, you just sit down. But you don't carry on and try and finish it off like that. And if you did, this is obviously where a person would know that he has, otherwise he wouldn't even really know. So the question wouldn't even
So if you've not
known.
known,
Then it wouldn't count because you don't know. I mean, but this is if you knew, because the thing is to do with capacity to change something. Like if you don't know, then you're not questionable. Like because there has to be knowledge of what you're doing. So, okay.
Mufti, one more thing I just came up.
No.
You said in the past that as a principle with the Malikis, if you say something extra, that you don't need to do such a sahw for it. Here they talked about the takbirat and Sami Allahu liman hamida, for which if you don't do the sajda sahw, you could potentially invalidate. So this obviously suggests that you would need to do sajda sahw for a spoken element.
This is talking about leaving a sunnah.
Yeah.
I was talking about if a person spoke, added extra verbal things into salah. The question would be that would it break the salah? If it was from the nature of salah, i.e. dhikr, etc., then unanimously wouldn't break salah. So for example, if a person said, let's say you're standing up and you said extra, like you said the word Allahu Akbar, extra, which is a word of salah anyway, that wouldn't impact the salah whatsoever. If it wasn't from the salah, if it was still dhikr, it wouldn't be a problem. So, because dhikr, I suppose it kind of is the first point because it's still somehow part of salah. So let's say a person sneezed, said alhamdulillah, like just without thinking about it, that wouldn't break the salah. Now, if a person forgetfully spoke in salah, that wouldn't break the salah. Forgetfully saying something. So if a person did say, like let's say, yeah, if you said wa alaikum salam unconsciously, that wouldn't break your salah. Right, now what you have done though is added something in the salah and therefore you do sujood al-sahw. Now,
I thought you wouldn't have spoken.
no, you would if we're talking about just speech.
Yeah.
Like you said something like, hey, wait there, wait, oh, I mean,
Oh,
salah,
that.
like that, yeah, like that.
Oh, right, okay.
So like, if you said it accidentally, you would then do sujood al-sahw for it. If it was dhikr, then you wouldn't do sujood al-sahw for it. Like if it was, like I said, if it was like you sneezed and you said alhamdulillah, that is no, this. If it's from the jins of salah, if it's from the nature of salah, what you've done extra, there's you just carry on as normal. But if it's from if it's external to salah, so it's actual speech, you said something to someone, then you do sujood al-sahw. If you did it intentionally, you would have broken the salah. Unless it was to fix the salah that you spoke. So unless you...
Someone's going to walk in front of you and like that.
Not so much like that, but what they say is like, let's say the imam wasn't understanding. Like he stood up for the 5th rak'ah and somebody said, you know, Allahu Akbar, Subhanallah, and he's not listening, he's thinking. And then somebody said to him, you're in your 5th rak'ah. Well, that's the 5th rak'ah. That wouldn't actually break their salah to do that. Although I don't advise that you do that because most people don't know that, and so they will think you've definitely broke your salah. So one guy will turn around and say that you've broken your salah, mate. and the other one will say, I was going to say that, but thank God I didn't speak. So yeah, so that's the way not to do it. It's better to just say Allahu Akbar and do takbir instead. But technically speaking, in the Maliki madhab, if you spoke to save the salah, it doesn't actually break it. Naam. Well, kalam, that's why he mentions here. He says, "Warridda," which is an obvious one. Apostasy. If a person apostated, that would obviously break their salah. But al-qahqaha, laughter, laughing out loud. However, it is that doesn't include smiling. It doesn't include even like a bit like if a person did something like, and just that doesn't break your salah. But if a person laughed like, ha 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 ha, that would break your salah. Okay, so now. And he mentioned speaking for other than fixing the salah would break it. Well, akal wa shurb, common sense, eating, drinking, acting, doing so many actions would break the salah. Like that ain't from salah. So if a person starts moving his hand around so much, or start doing this, doing that, like starts doing the that would break the salah. Ghalabatul haqn or al-qarqara. This is an interesting one. That if a person, the first one is obviously is similar. If a person really was desperate to go to the toilet, that desperately, because first we said if they needed to go, but they weren't too desperate, but they could do their salah if they wanted. In that case, it's just makruh, because really you should be concentrating. But if you were so desperate to go and you carry on, then it would really, that salah would be invalid. You know, if a person's kind of cringing, you might as well just break the salah, because that salah isn't happening. So, and he mentions the same with like if a person's got like major like gas, if you like, and they're really struggling to kind of hold it in, and they're going, and they're really like cringing, and they're doing this, then they better just go and breaking the salah and then coming back and just repeating it in tranquility. Now that's an interesting one he mentions, كذلك الهم, which is like being depressed or having like an issue, like which I think would have to rule that one out today with major clinical depression everywhere. So, but the thing is, person says, why don't you pray? I'm just depressed, really. Just my salah would be invalid according to Qadi Iyad. So, you know, just I'm going to the steam room. I need to really kind of like relax. So,
I need a massage.
So
a severe depression.
Like what they mean by it is like grief and depression, in the sense that it really comes back to that issue of state of mind. But this is going with the fact that you know you can calm down within a while. Then you're better off kind of like going to a state where you're more calm and then praying. Like
with like severe anxiety.
Yeah, like if somebody was in a state of like severe anxiety, they're better not praying at that stage. Perhaps just giving themselves a little while to calm down and then praying with a cool mind.
Because he actually says, doesn't he, that it's to the point where they don't understand what.
Yeah, and he does say that, and he says that, you know, حتى يشغله عنها, well, to the extent that person doesn't know what because they're so freaked out or whatever by this anxiety attack that they don't even know what they're praying, and they just.
So if it's say like you had a car crash or something.
Or like you missed your gym session today. Oh, can't understand what I'm saying. I'm praying Fajr or Maghrib, I don't know. Or you've finally completed the last episode of Dexter. And you're like, what has happened there? Right, so the thing is, Okay. But yeah, your answer to that was that's correct here. Like if a person was in a state of shock as well. Although he didn't say shock, but you're right, including shock. Just maybe calm down first, relax, and then pray salah. Leaning on anything in such a way that if the thing was to be moved, you'd fall. That would kind of, like basically, although technically I suppose you'd think, well, has it actually broken his salah until he moves it, I suppose. But generally they say that, you shouldn't be kind of just leaning on something. If you were in a salah which has tartib, okay, which are really just the dual salahs which kind of come together. So Dhuhr and Asr come together, Maghrib and Isha come together. As in, if you're in Asr and you remembered Dhuhr, like, oh, I haven't prayed Dhuhr, you have to break Asr and pray Dhuhr first, because these two prayers amongst themselves must be in sequence. So Dhuhr and Asr must be in sequence. Like you couldn't pray Asr before Dhuhr. I mean, you can't do that anyway, but let's just say you forgot that you hadn't prayed Dhuhr, and now you're praying Asr and you remember, oh, you haven't prayed Dhuhr. You couldn't think, let me finish Asr and then I'll pray Dhuhr.
What about Fajr? And then
Whereas the sequence, the necessary sequence is between these two. So between Dhuhr and Asr and between Maghrib and Isha. It's not between, for example, Asr and Maghrib. And it's not between Isha and Fajr or Subah. And it's not between Subah and Dhuhr. So it's like they technically, if you're praying Dhuhr and you remember, damn, I haven't prayed Subah today. You can finish praying Dhuhr and then pray Subah afterwards. The reason being that Asr time is technically still a time for Dhuhr. And Isha time is technically still a time for Maghrib. So therefore you remember that Salah in its time. So you need to be praying that one and not the one that came after.
And is that just according to the Maliki madhab? Or is that?
The tartib, generally this style of doing it, yeah. The madhabs have the Shafi'i madhab is relaxed about tartib. It doesn't have tartib in that sense. The Hanafi madhab has its tartib but in a different way. They generally, I mean, I've heard different narrations. I've heard them say that 5 salahs together are of tartib. If you've missed up to 5, then you must do tartib in their sequence. Otherwise, if you've missed more than 5, then there's no tartib. And I've also heard them say, which is a weird one, that you only have to do tartib if you are what they call a sahibut tartib, one who has always prayed in tartib. Which doesn't really make sense, does it? I've always found that one weird, like, So actually, if I haven't done it right, you've kind of done yourself over in a way, because you're now kind of a person that has to. It seems like you're kind of negatively rewarding them for having done something good. But anyway, so that's.
This isn't talking about Jama. It's talking about generally.
No, but it's talking about generally, but because the space facilitates for that, that's why.
So if you're in an Asr Jama'ah,
You have to break it.
you have to break the Jama'ah.
Or you continue praying it, but you have to repeat Dhuhr and Asr.
No.
It's time to take Shafi'i's opinion.
But the thing is, it makes sense, you see. It's not about, they're not just going on this flex of tartib for the sake of tartib. But they're saying that, you see, because the hadith mentions, is that, man nama an salatin or nasiha, and in this case, that whoever slept over a salah or forgot about it, as in this person, فَلْيُصَلِّهَا حِينَ ذَكَرَهَا, then let him pray as he remembers it. And this is like you are in the time for it. So it kind of makes sense.
Of those two, which would you do then? So if you're in an Asr Jama'ah and you now remember.
I'm in the
personally-
Jama'ah.
Yeah, personally, what would you do?
Usually, where that has happened to me, I've not joined the Jama'ah yet. So I've just prayed. Like there have been occasions where I've prayed quickly, like I've prayed Dhuhr quickly and joined Asr. And on maybe some rare occasions, it's ended up missing the Jama'ah, but I had to pray that. But I would do that then, because the thing is, you're not really allowed to join something if you've still got Dhuhr on you as an obligation.
See, what happened with me once was I was supposed to make Jama.
Okay.
And as I was about to start making Jama, then you did the Iqamah for Asr. So then I just prayed Asr. And based on the Shafi'i opinion, just did Dhuhr afterwards.
But I mean, you're mujtahid mutlaq, so I'm joking. No, I'm joking. No, I mean, it's okay. Look, it doesn't, Like, it doesn't make a difference about somebody having, like, what I'm trying to say is don't, you know, retrospectively, whatever a person's done is cool. Like don't worry about it. There's some way that it's valid one way or another. It's not about, I'm not trying to say go and repeat all your salahs or something like that, but know how to just conduct yourself for the future type of thing. So you're thinking, well, okay, I know if I'm in this situation, I'll do it like this. Because otherwise there are opinions that you can just do it like that. There are opinions that no, we must always, every salah must be in tartib type of thing. And there's opinions like this that only the two have to be in tartib. It's like a middle way. It's not too harsh really. It's not saying like Fajr and Dhuhr have to be in tartib or so on. So cool. So, right. And also he mentions Salah in the Kaaba or upon the Kaaba. And that's because we're asked to, you know, فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرَ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. That Allah says, and turn your faces to the Kaaba. So obviously, how do you turn your face to the Kaaba if you're inside it? Or if you're on top of it? So
it actually invalidates. It's not makruh.
it's invalid because the thing is, where would you be praying to? Is the question. Now, where is your direction? Not that they. I mean, apart from royal dignitaries, I don't know if they let anybody inside the Kaaba anyway nowadays. Do they? I don't think so.
They visitors, for example. They let them
But only I thought royal or.
Yes. And
That's Ammatun Nas.
لا عامة الناس اللهم إلا الطلاب الذين يعني المتسابقون في القرآن الكريم أحيانا في
Oh, okay. As a competition, he's saying maybe, like as a winner, prize winner, not as a lottery. Like you'll get, what is it, 18 million, and you get to go inside the Kaaba to collect the check. Not like that.
And this is for Fard prize only. You can't do Nawafil inside.
Yeah, Nafal you can. Yeah, Nafal is chilled. On the roof of the Kaaba, I think will be.
But still, the same issue applies. Where do you face though? If you're
Yeah,
inside?
exactly. No, but
anyway you face, you're facing the Kaaba.
the Nafal. The only reason they're relaxed about the Nafal is because they say, well, it's Nafal anyway. So, and you're allowed to, like on a journey, you're allowed to pray Nafal where you're traveling, even if you're not facing the Kaaba and stuff like this. So, and there is some riwayat that somebody says he saw the Prophet ﷺ praying inside the Kaaba. There is a riwayah. But then the problem is other Sahaba said that was not true, that he didn't pray inside and so on. So there's a reconciliation between what's actually going on. Right. Okay, now he then also mentions if you had done tayammum and then all of a sudden remembered, oh wait a minute, I've got water during the salah. So, oh, what am I talking about? Of course, plenty of water upstairs. So in that case, you would go and do your wudu. Also, if the salah of your imam becomes invalid, your salah becomes invalid unless it's for something that the imam can kind of fix. Like, i.e., like the imam's got to go to the toilet, therefore he puts somebody else as a deputy imam. Like, because if the imam breaks his salah, he can do what is called istikhlaf, that he can step out and just bring somebody forward and that person continue to lead the salah. If he does that, that's fine. But if he broke the salah in something else, like he missed out, I don't know, he did something wrong in it or whatever, and like started speaking or did something, that wouldn't just break his, it'd break everybody's.
And if you left out a major rukn or something and you didn't correct it,
I'll tell you what is interesting. Yeah, obviously. But then, to be fair, if he missed out a major rukn, the people behind him would know.
it's like
Unless they don't, then you got a bigger problem. They don't realise either. Everybody just missed ruku. Nobody realised.
What if he keeps it quiet? He keeps it a bit hushed that he's messed something up and the others don't know.
Yeah, if you don't know, you don't know. What's interesting is, you know, if the imam realised, oh, yesterday when I led people, I didn't have wudu or I didn't have ghusl. So, like, let's say, obviously, but now it's done. And it's not done just there, like not just after the salah he remembers, but like the next day, or he remembers after people have dispersed. What's interesting is that the Maliki have generally said that there isn't an obligation to reach all those people and tell them.
It isn't.
No. Because they say it happened in the time of Umar and it wasn't known that he went and told everybody. Although if you are there, then you can't, like if you're there, then you should just tell them, look guys, by the way, I was only kidding. No, that was just a joke. Now we're going to do it for real. Okay. But if it wasn't, like if you'd forgotten, and if now afterwards you remembered, you don't have to kind of hunt down all those people. Although I believe that Hanafiya feel that there is an obligation, you have to go and find every person, like kind of, or do your best, like make announcements and so on, and that'd be embarrassing. Be like, yeah, got something to say.
What if you was leading a salah and the people behind you did one rak'ah less, but then when you turn around they still carried on? Is their prayer invalidated or?
If they carried on,
If they carried on, say like
You
we're
did
praying
3.
and you guys are behind me, and I did 3, but I meant to do 4, and then they carry on and do 4. Is their prayer invalid also, or is it just mine?
you see, they can't just do that. Like they would have to kind of like hint to you because they're praying behind you. So for example, if you sat down now and this is the 3rd rak'ah and it's praying Isha or something, then they would start saying like Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, or like Allahu Akbar, and they would stand up and they would probably say Allahu Akbar, and then you would obviously at some point like realize, why is everybody else standing, and you'd probably get up. But if you carried on like saying no, like don't worry about it, these people are doing a lot of zikr today. Right, they don't, you're like idiots don't even know how to pray. You're supposed to be reading tashahhud.
I've
If you carried on
with somebody and they've not said anything behind me, and I thought I'd finished, and then they said after the prayer, you did one less, but they've carried on and done it.
That's great of them. Great muqtadis. Just like went off and like did their own salah. But that's not how they should do it. Like,
would their salah be
Will
valid?
their salah be valid though?
if they continued like that, you see, if you're behind the imam, you see, you are really what they call min masajin al-imam. You're like imprisoned almost, like if you're incarcerated by what the imam is doing. But the question here is that the imam is obviously done something forgetfully wrong. Now you are in a position, or you have a duty at that point to inform the imam because your salah is by him. But if he didn't, and let's say he did salam and you carried on, your salah would be valid. It would be valid. So their salah would have been valid. The only thing is that it would have been kind of, they did that wrong. They should have kind of said so. The other question, I'll tell you, the flip side to that question is more interesting. That if the imam continued to do something extra, you see, you're talking about something less. So them doing the extra thing is only doing what was necessary upon them anyway. If, for example, you stood up for a 5th rak'ah, and they said, like, they all sat down and said, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, but you didn't listen, and you carry on doing a 5th rak'ah all the way, and then some of them start following you in that 5th rak'ah, their salah would become invalid. Because they are purposely adding extra things to their salah. So, I mean, that would kind of invalidate it. Right, Sahul Hadath, where are we? Also, Fasad Salat Imam Najis wa Iqamat al-Imam alayhi salatun ukhra. If the Imam is praying a different, now this is, by the way, you know this thing, Iqamat al-Imam alayhi salatun ukhra, or salatun ukhra, is talking about generally if you were praying in a nafal type of situation. There's 2 type of interpretations, but I mean, if you were praying something which wasn't an obligation and the imam starts an obligatory prayer, you should really break your salah. Or some people say that would break your salah anyway, and you should join his salah. The other, I'm just saying, he's not mentioned it otherwise, unless it's kind of just included in there, that I suppose you could interpret from this as well, that if the imam was praying a different salah, so for example, he's praying Asr, you're praying Dhuhr, really the Malikiyah don't allow this, neither do the Hanafiya, that you should be praying the same imam salah as your imam. And then he's mentioned as the last one, according to some scholars, that if a person intentionally leaves out sunnah of a salah, intentionally, if he says that, oh, these sunan, like, what the hell, can't be bothered. According to some people, your rejection of it intentionally, conscientiously invalidates the salah. Although missing a sunnah, according to many people, doesn't actually break the salah, but it's more about the intention on why you've left it. Like if a person says, I can't be bothered, it's only sunnah, forget it. Like that denigrating type of outlook to it.
But if you just come in, it's nearly gonna miss the next sunnah.
No, I don't mean that sunnah. I mean a sunnah act within salah. So let's say, for example, reciting a surah after Fatiha, or like reciting the tashahhud, or reciting if a person forgot these things, he would have to do sujood sahw, the sajda which fixes the salah at the end. But if a person just didn't do sajda sahw, but you also just like, oh, I can't be bothered to read this, and left it out with that intention of, oh, it's only sunnah, that type of despising.
Say you come in and it's almost gonna go into the next salah. Could you shorten the salah by not doing the sunnah bits? Could you just do the five things?
Yeah, what are you about to do? Like, what's happening over there? Is there jama'ah going on?
No, you mean like if you pray by yourself, say like you're just coming from work and like you got 3 minutes left of Asr before Maghrib comes in.
Oh, so you've got a short time, short span of time.
Mm-hmm.
And you just want to, you could, but ideally what you can do is shorten, like, so for example, imagine for a surah you just read one verse even, like let's just say, technically, even if you said like Qul Allahu Ahad, like you still read something. Now you've just gone straight into ruku. You've probably just been there even a second, like just to say, like, you've not, so you are missing out like what would be considered like sunan, but because of a valid reason, which is that the time is so condensed and so on. So that would be fine. But this is more talking about where a person is almost looking down upon the sunnah, like saying, oh, what the hell, it's only sunnah. That attitude. So that, he says, with this we have covered 100 aspects of salah now. I think then he's going to begin Jummah. I think we might as well kind of pause it there, inshallah, for today's dars. We've got some, refreshments. And if there's any questions, we can just deal with that, and then we'll continue, inshallah.
If you pray and sit down,
No.
And you normally pray 7, I'm like, where do you put your hands?
So you just kind of swing. Now you could just leave them on the side. Just
like.
Or you kind of like, or on the 2 guys next to you. So now you just leave them, I suppose, at the side, isn't it? But you're probably better off. You could just leave them here like that. Like, it's not a big deal. I mean, don't sit on them, but like.